Last week, Marvel released the first couple episodes for their Disney Plus series, Daredevil Born Again, and I thought they were decent. Not fantastic. I didn't have the same excitement watching them as I did with the Netflix version of Daredevil when that first came out, but overall, I thought it was okay. However, I do see some potential trouble on the horizon with certain storylines if they handle them the same way as what the comics did, but that's an issue for another time. Just judging these first couple episodes, I thought they were fine. However, we just got some viewership data from it, according to Disney, and while they're trying to play it up to be like it's a victory, it's really not that good when you start comparing the viewership numbers for this series with other Disney Plus shows in the past that have been considered failures. Daredevil Born Again viewership exposed as Disney and Variety try to spin a disappointing launch, worse than the Acolyte and Agatha. And you heard that right. The viewership figures for the first couple episodes of this are worse than what we saw with the Acolyte and Agatha. And if that's the case, that looks like they're in some trouble with it. Marvel Studios had high hopes for Daredevil Born Again, positioning it as a major revival of the Netflix era Daredevil series and a key effort to win back long-time fans. However, despite Variety and Disney painting the numbers as a success, a closer look reveals a starkly different story. According to Disney, Daredevil Born Again drew 7.5 million views in the first 5 days. Variety calls this a strong launch, and I think in ordinary circumstances, this would be considered a strong launch, but there's issues with that I'll get to in a moment. But in reality, this number falls well below expectations for a series of this magnitude. For comparison, the Acolyte series that performed so poorly it was shelved after one season managed 11.1 million views in its first week. That was already considered underwhelming, coming in 3 million below Ahsoka. Even Agatha, all along widely regarded as a disastrous misfire for Marvel streaming, managed 9.3 million in its first week. And I do think it is important to point out one of the reasons why the viewership for the Acolyte was so disastrous, I mean, just putting aside the fact that it's not necessarily an apples to apples comparison, since Star Wars and Marvel, even though they're both Disney-owned properties and they have shows on Disney Plus, I'm not going to say that they're necessarily equal comparisons, but the biggest problem with the Acolyte was the budget for that. It was one of, if not the most expensive Disney Plus show, or the most expensive Disney Plus Star Wars show, if not the most expensive show that they had on there. And having numbers that are less than quite a few other shows that they've, at least that we know about, that's why the Acolyte was so disastrous. And I even said at the time, they were making it for a niche audience. And if they would have budgeted accordingly, then the viewership would have been considered pretty good if it would have had a modest budget. But since they spent so much on it, they needed general audience approval. And that's something that they didn't get for it. Agatha, on the other hand, supposedly that had a pretty low budget for that show. And with 9.3 million, they say that was a success. I don't know. I personally doubt whether the budget was as low as what they're saying. But if that's the case, then I think we could expect to see a second season of that if it really was indeed a success. But that's the biggest question about Daredevil, whether or not it is a success, is how much did they spend on it? Because if it was a modest budget show, then 7.5 million views might actually be pretty decent. But I personally doubt that's the case when it comes to it, because we already know that they shot half the series and then they scrapped it all and started over again. And doing something like that, I can't imagine being cheap. And with the way the production is so far, we don't have a confirmation on how much they spent on it. But I'm thinking it's probably a couple $100 million with what we're getting with it. Maybe we'll hear a different figure later on down the line, but right now it looks like, considering that is probably as good as any other Disney Plus show, and they had to basically do it. They did half of it, then they had to redo it again. I'm thinking this is probably a more expensive Disney Plus Marvel show, or at least it's not as modest of a one as what the viewership numbers that they're getting would actually make a success. This raises serious questions about the future of Marvel television projects. If Daredevil Born Again, with its strong brand recognition and returning fan favorite cast, can outperform some of Marvel's weakest streaming entries, is the studio truly capable of turning things around? And bringing back the cast, I think that is a good move on that. However, there is a kind of a dark cloud over them. I mean, we saw with Vincent D'Onofrio's Kingpin. They brought him back for a couple series, and a lot of people didn't like how they portrayed him in Echo or in Hawkeye. Charlie Cox, people didn't like how they portrayed Daredevil in She-Hulk. And those are still canon to this Daredevil right here. So there's that kind of lingering over it. But if the show is overall good, I can put that aside and just kind of forget about those other portrayals. But I think this is kind of an interesting point where even with characters like that from a series that people really liked, if that's not enough to get people to actually tune in, then what can they do? Disney and Variety can attempt to spin these numbers, but the reality is clear. This was supposed to be a major comeback, and instead it signals further decline. And another thing I don't like about this is Disney doesn't really release their viewership figures too often. Much of the time we have to rely on third parties. I got this pulled up. These are the Samba results for other Marvel Disney Plus shows when those came out and what the viewership figures that they had for the premiere episodes of those are. And you can see Loki was number one according to their metric at 2.5 million. And Miss Marvel was the worst one at 0.78, so 780,000. Secret Invasion, I think this is another point because that was a legacy character one and it had just under 1 million viewers during its opening weekend. So once we get some other third-party data, we'll have a better comparison on where Daredevil stacks up with all these other ones. Maybe it would be higher up on here. Maybe it's lower. We don't know, but I'm not saying that these numbers are actually the true viewership numbers. I'm just saying that we'll have a way to actually measure it up with some of the other shows that Disney has produced for Marvel. Adding to the issue is Disney's selective release of streaming data, unlike platforms such as Netflix and Amazon Prime, which provide detailed metrics. Disney Plus releases numbers only when they suit a positive narrative. This makes their claim difficult to verify, yet even using Disney's own viewership metrics, Daredevil Born Again appears to be one of the weakest performing Marvel debuts on the platform. And one of the things, just kind of going back to Agatha and the supposedly low budget of that, after the first week or so of that, we heard that the viewership numbers for it didn't seem like it was that great. And that's when the news came out that no, the budget for it was actually really low. Since they haven't released the budget for it yet, maybe it's something that they're waiting for later on, and we will hear later on that the budget was low for it. But if they never actually release it at all or or if there's no reporting on what the budget was for Daredevil, then I think it's safe to assume that it is pretty high. And even if they do release it and it seems like it's pretty low, you have to keep in mind, is it really low for like the version that they shot and they're not counting the version that they scrapped of it? Because I think it is fair to add that to it, but I don't think Disney will ever report the numbers of how much they basically threw away with Daredevil Born Again before they decided to start over from scratch. At this point, Marvel Studios is facing an uphill battle to regain audience trust. The push to reclaim the momentum of the past is growing more desperate, and projects like Daredevil Born Again were meant to be the remedy. Instead, with a launch this lackluster, it seems the studio is still struggling to bring audiences back. If Marvel's legacy characters can't drive engagement, what does that mean for its future? And I briefly mentioned it. That was kind of an issue they had with Secret Invasion. That was a legacy character with a popular fan favorite character in Nick Fury. And that wasn't enough to bring audiences back. This one, I'm thinking it's probably going to do better than what we saw with Secret Invasion, but it's still all the same. I think part of that has to deal with the fact that these characters were, as I previously mentioned, are kind of tainted from some of their other appearances within the MCU, or at least the Disney Plus Marvel shows. But also, I think a lot of people are just kind of cynical when it comes to Marvel stuff, and they're taking a wait and see approach. Maybe if people came out after the first episodes or the first 2 episodes premiered and they were saying it was just fantastic, then maybe that would have brought more people into the fold, or kind of tempered some of the worries that people might have, or longtime fans of the Daredevil series might have had. But since the reaction was just kind of like, it's okay, but there's potential problems on the horizon, I think some people are still taking that wait and see approach. Maybe they're going to binge it when it's all said and done, or maybe they're going to wait to see if it actually sticks the landing or if it just fumbles in. And if it does, then I don't think we're going to see viewership pick up. But if it turns out the series ends and it's actually really good with the way they handle everything, then maybe you could get more viewership figures. But as of right now, the numbers just aren't looking good for it, or at least they're presumably not good. If you take into consideration, they probably spent a lot of money on this show. But let me know what you think about this in the comment section below. Did you watch it, and what did you think of it if you did? Or are you just kind of taking a wait and see approach, or do you just not plan on watching anything Marvel related whatsoever? Comment below. And also, if you haven't already, make sure you click that subscribe button if you want to stay up to date with the latest entertainment news. And don't forget to click the like button and share this video out there, because it really helps out with the channel. Thank you.